أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله، وأحسن الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Brothers and sisters in Islam, today we're talking about Al-Wara. And Al-Wara, as one of the scholars defined it, he said, Al-Wara هو الخروج من كل شبهة ومحاسبة النفس في كل طرفة عين. He says Al-Wara is to avoid every doubtful issue. So not haram, it's an issue that's halal, but you have some suspicion, some doubt that there might be something wrong with it. That you stay away from that and you hold yourself accountable every time you blink. Yani he's hyperbolizing, he's saying every time you blink, you're holding yourself accountable. Or in another definition, it is to leave the halal, the permissible, not the sin, not the haram, but to leave the halal that has doubt in it out of fear of falling into the haram. The great companion Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he used to say, كنا ندع 70 بابا من الحلال مخافة أن نقع في باب من الحرام. He said we used to leave 70 doors, 70 avenues, 70 areas of halal just out of fear that we might fall into a door of haram. So things that are halal, they're leaving it. So al-wara' is really a very refined and a very high level of iman. It is not for everyone. It is these righteous people who stay away from things that are permissible out of suspicion or out of fear that there's something wrong with them or something haram. And so Abu Bakr said we would leave 70 things that were halal, permissible, out of fear that we might fall into one thing that is haram. The attributes of a person, or the hadith first, the hadith of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this hadith is a basis for a lot of fatwa and a lot of rules and basic guidelines in Islam. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, this was narrated by his grandson Al-Hasan ibn Ali radiallahu anhuma. He says, and Nabi Sallallahu I memorized from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He was 8 years old when he memorized this. He was born in the 3rd year after the Hijrah, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam died in the 11th year after the Hijrah. So he says, I memorized from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك. Leave that which gives you doubt to that which does not give you doubt. So it's not haram, but you have some doubt in an issue. Leave it and go to something that brings you or gives you no doubt whatsoever. So the scholars say the attributes of Al-Wara', someone who has this high level of taqwa and a high level of fear of Allah and wants to stay away from, not from the haram, but even something halal that might have something haram in it. They said from the attributes of this person, number 1 is that they leave the haram itself. Number 2, that they stay away from doubtful issues. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, the great scholar, he used to say, ترك الشبهات باب من أوسع أبواب الورع. Leaving doubtful issues is one of the greatest doors leading to wara'. So you leave the haram, you leave things that are doubtful, you leave what seems okay out of fear that it may not be okay, and you leave that which you're suspicious of. And the scholars say this is all, of course, mustahab, not wajib. But and whatever it is, you're dealing with in business with someone, and you know that his wealth is mixed, he deals with haram things. Here, from the gates of wara', or from this avenue, you would stay away from dealing with someone like this. From the hadith, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is narrated by At-Tabarani and Al-Hakim, and is narrated by Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, the companion. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, فضل العلم أحب إلي من فضل العبادة. So he's saying that seeking knowledge is more beloved to me, and he's saying it's more virtuous and it's better than worship. Because the scholars say when you seek knowledge, you learn when to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. You learn how to worship Allah. You learn the best times to worship Allah. And that knowledge then transfers onto other people. Whereas when you worship, it just stays with you, the reward. So the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is saying that the virtues of seeking knowledge are greater than that of just being a worshipper, a devout worshipper. And then he says, وَخَيْرُ دِينِكُمْ الْوَرَعَ. And the best of your religion, the best part of your is al-wara', to be aware and careful even from the halal out of fear that it might lead you into the haram. In another hadith narrated by Ibn Majah and Al-Bayhaqi, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he says, the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kun wari'an," his advice, "Kun wari'an takun a'bad an-nas." If you have wara', be someone who has wara', and you will be of the most devout of the worshippers of Allah Azza wa Jal. So from the examples, and remember we're talking about people who leave halal issues, not haram, halal issues out of fear that there might be some doubt in them. And we have a lot of excellent examples in our ummah. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he had a servant that every now and then he would bring him food, he would bring him dates from his farms or what have you. So he brought him some dates, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu ate these dates. And then he tells him, "Do you know how I got these dates?" He says, "Before Islam, I used to basically do, what they call a soothsaying or pretend to be a clairvoyant, yani tell the future to someone. And I told them some nonsense before Islam, and one of them happened to be true, coincided, it happened later, but by coincidence. So the man was happy and he brought me some dates, and I brought the dates to you." So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu immediately, now this is not halal money. He tricked someone and the person brought him these dates. So he says, this is not permissible. So he tells them, "Get me a glass of water." And now what's interesting here, fiqh-wise, the dates are halal because he didn't know. And if you happen to go to a restaurant and you take a bite or two of something that has pork or lard or whatever in it, it is actually because you didn't know what's in your stomach is halal for you. Anything else will be haram. Next bite is haram. But what you already ingested is actually halal. The scholars say it's permissible because you didn't know. If you can ingest something that has alcohol in it by accident, you were choking, you grabbed a drink and there was alcohol in it, it's actually halal. You don't have to vomit it or get it out of your stomach, regurgitate it. But Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he told the boy to bring him water. And then he drank the water, and then he kept putting his finger in his throat, and he kept vomiting and vomiting until he got at least every last bit out. So the boy tells him, you don't have to do that. Even the boy understands the fiqh. Okay, now I understand now that these dates weren't the most halal, but you didn't have to go to this extreme to vomit. But Abu Bakr tells him, Wallahi, if the only way to get it out was to take my soul out with it, I would have taken my soul out with it. If it killed me to take it out, I would die to take it out. Because I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that every body, meaning every jasad that was nurtured with haram, the fire is more deserving of it. The fire is more deserving of it. Any body that was raised and nurtured and got nutrition and fed from the haram, the fire is more deserving of that body. And that's why Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu refused, and he insisted, كل جسد نبت من حرام أو نبت من سحت السحت فالنار أولى به. So that's why Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, that's from his wara', because it was halal, he didn't know, but from his wara' he refused to keep it in his stomach. We have many excellent examples. Umar radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa, he was sitting in the masjid, and then he saw a group of camels pass by, and they were fattened and in good health, these camels. So he asked, who do these camels belong to? They said to Abdullah. He said, which Abdullah? He said, Abdullah ibn Umar, your son. So he called his son. He said, what's the story behind these camels? And they were exceptionally fatter than the others. There's an area called Al-Hima, and that's where all the animals would go and graze and fatten up. So he says, what's the story behind these camels? He said, I brought them from my own wealth, and I want them to grow and get bigger, and then I'll sell them for a profit. So Umar radiallahu anhu tells him, sell your camels and take back your capital, and whatever profit you make, put it in the treasury of the Muslims, put it fi bayt al-mal. So his son asked, why? This is halal, nothing is done wrong here. So Umar radiallahu anhu explains to him that your camels are fatter than the rest of the camels because they got preferential treatment. So people would say, Ir'u ibil ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen. At'imu ibil ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen. Feed the camels of the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Make way for the camels of the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So your camels got extra treatment, special treatment, because of the position of your father. It's not haram. He didn't do anything wrong, but this was from the wara' of Umar radiallahu anhu. He used to say, نحن كاللحم والناس كالصقور. He used to say, we're like meat, meaning people in positions of power, in leadership, people see them like meat, and people are like eagles or falcons. They're coming to snatch that meat. What he means is, they're looking for any mistake, they're looking for any area to criticize, to point the finger, and we're not going to allow that. There is nothing wrong here as far as Islam is concerned, but the fact that your camels got preferential treatment because of the position of your father is not acceptable. And so he made his son sell them and give the capital or the profit back to Bayt al-Mal. One time a man brought a large container of musk oil from Bahrain, the area of Bahrain, and he brought it to be distributed amongst the Muslims. So Umar says, if I only knew someone who could divide this into smaller vessels or containers so we can distribute those amongst the believers. And Atika, who was his wife and also his cousin, she said, I can do it. And I know very well how to do this. So he refused. And when she asked why, he says, because you're going to put your hand in the misk. It's inevitable. Some of it is going to get on your hands. And then you're going to go hakada. And he wiped his chest and he wiped his neck. What do you do when you have oil, good oil, cologne on your hands? You don't wash your hands. You rub it on your clothing, you rub it on your body. He says it was intended for the believing men and women. The man didn't come and say, this is a gift for the wife of Amir al-Mu'mineen, but it's inevitable you're going to get some of it. Now, whatever she would get from it that spilled accidentally on her fingers, would that have been haram? It wouldn't have been haram. But this is from the wara' of Umar radiallahu anhu. So, we have these examples. We have many examples of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz where he had in his home 2 lamps. A man says, I stayed with Umar ibn Abdul Aziz at night in his home when he was the Khalifa. And he was the Khalifa like 13th in order. But he says, I stayed with him in his home and he had 2 oil lamps. That's how he illuminated the room. One lamp, the oil was paid for from his own pocket. The other lamp, the oil was paid for by the Muslims, the treasury of the Muslims, government money. He said, every time he needed to do something for himself, he would put that lamp out and he would ignite the other one where the oil is paid for from his money. Then he wants to do something back, something related to government work. He would put that light out and then he would turn this one on. And he went back and forth like that. Because this is from his wara. Even though he can just estimate the amount of oil that used, a teaspoon or a quarter of a teaspoon. But this was the wara of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz radiallahu anhu. And this is to some degree a standard we should hold ourselves to. Again, at work, with our time card, with how much we take off lunch and how much we take off for breaks and for Jummah and so on and so forth. Do we work at this level of detail of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz or the righteous that were before us? So, with that, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who have wara'. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم من جميع الذنوب فاستغفروه فيا فوز المستغفرين. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So like we said in the beginning, that wara' is something for the righteous. And the scholars say there are some conditions. And if someone wants to behave in this way, to be very detailed, to even avoid the halal out of fear that there's haram in it, the first thing is they have to be someone who does not commit sins or commit major sins. Yani someone who constantly falls into the haram, he cannot now say, I'm going to have wara' in this area or that area. Because remember we said, wara' is when you leave areas that are halal because they might have doubt in them. So how can someone who constantly falls into the haram leave the halal because it might have haram? And he's used to falling into the haram. So it doesn't count. That's like your teenage son who grows his hair long because it's a sunnah. First of all, it's not a sunnah. Second thing, pray 5 times a day, then we'll see about your sunnah. And you can't just grab one thing and say, khalas, here it is. So you can't have someone who is going to avoid the halal. And some things, there are some areas that are not areas of wara'. Yani Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, for example, he said that the first thing you'll be asked about on the day of judgment, from the blessing of this world, cold water. So someone starts drinking warm water. Khalas, I don't want to be asked in front of Allah. طيب, there are bigger things in your life than you drinking cold water, which is halal. Get rid of all the sins in your life first before you get into that. So there's almost like to say a hierarchy. You can't just suddenly take one of the aspects of people who have wara' while the rest of your life doesn't resemble that. And then of course, there are also some areas of deception where the shaitan might come in. So the scholar said there are areas where it's makruh to be wara'. For example, if someone has waswasa, they always have doubt concerning the correctness of their wudu. Is it valid or invalid? Did they break wudu or not? Here, it's not wara' to keep repeating the wudu 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, as some people do because they have doubt, did I break their wudu or not? So if someone has waswasa, for example, so in this case, it's disliked for you to have wara' in this area. Likewise, it is disliked to leave the rukhas. The rukhas are these allowances. So for example, you're traveling with a group of brothers and you're now allowed to shorten your salah. So someone says, I am not going to shorten my salah. I'm going to present it full 4 rak'at to Allah Azza wa Jal. This this type of wara' here is makruh. Because the scholar said true wara' in this case would be to pray the 2 rak'at, to do what the Prophet ﷺ did. And we know from the hadith that Allah loves that people approach His allowances, His rukhas. So it's not wara' in this case to ignore them. So, and of course, there's also wara' in speech. Yani, wara' in speech is simply avoiding telling lies, backbiting, ghiba, and namima, and speaking about other people. And again, you cannot have this aspect in your life where you're constantly backbiting, and then you want to be wara' in a very fine, detailed issue. Or someone has wara' only when it comes to his food. So he's checking ingredients and reading every one of the chemical ingredients and Googling what each one is and all that. But then they're constantly falling into other haram that is known to be haram. But they only have wara' with food. And what happens is, this is one of the avenues through which the shaitan tricks people. He actually supports you in being righteous or being very detailed in one issue so that you feel good about yourself and you forget more serious issues that you're neglecting severely. When I lived in Canada, our imam says he was shopping in a store and a woman came to him, Muslim woman, wearing a mini skirt. And she points to an ingredient in his cart. She said, "Brother, this has a haram ingredient in it." He says, "I looked into it." He tells her, "I looked into it and it's not haram." She said, "Yes, it is haram." And then she shook her head and walked away. Yani these people who don't care about the halal and the haram. While she's wearing her miniskirts, she walks away. Yani this is an example of someone being fooled by the shaitan, where they're very religious when it comes to scrutinizing food ingredients, to the point like they're like a scientist now. But in very major issues, they're committing haram, but they're fooled because they feel satisfied because they're very religious in this one issue. So these are avenues through which the shaitan can come to an individual, tricking them that they have wara'. But like we said, wara' is for the righteous, and the conditions are you leave the haram, and then you leave the halal because you have some doubt that maybe there's some haram in it. A business transaction, a trip, whatever it is, kind of dealing that you even have a bad feeling. And Nabi ﷺ said again, "Da' ma yuribuk." Leave that which gives you doubt to that which doesn't give you doubt. So even if something makes you uncomfortable, you can leave it and you have that option. And it's not a command from Nabi ﷺ, but you can leave it and you have that option, and that would be part of wara'. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the people of wara' and of the people of taqwa. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us of those who recognize the truth as clear truth and follow the best of it, and to make us of those who recognize falsehood as clear falsehood and abstain from it. فاللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه اللهم لا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا إلى النار مصيرنا اللهم أبرم لهذه الأمة أمر رشد يعز فيه أهل طاعتك ويهدى فيه أهل معصيتك ويؤمر فيه بالمعروف وينهى فيه عن المنكر يا سميع الدعاء وصلى اللهم وبارك على مبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وقوموا إلى صلاتكم يرحمكم الله.